The first sign of trouble came in the form of a shadow passing across Mike Donovan's kitchen window. He looked up from his coffee to see his neighbor, Diane Winters, peering over his fence again. It was the third time this week. Mike sighed and set his mug down, mentally preparing himself for what would undoubtedly be another neighborhood confrontation. At 52, with silver creeping into his dark hair and the lines around his eyes deepening from both laughter and stress, Mike had hoped his decision to remove the old swimming pool would be a simple one. He couldn't have been more wrong. "Excuse me." Diane's voice carried across the yard before Mike could even step onto his back porch. "What exactly is going on here?" Mike squared his shoulders and walked across the dried grass toward the fence. The summer heat was oppressive, making the air shimmer above the concrete where his pool had once been. Now there was only a large rectangular depression surrounded by construction materials and the beginnings of what would become a native plant garden. "Good morning, Diane," Mike said, forcing a smile. "Just some renovations." Diane Winters, with her perfectly highlighted blonde bob and permanent look of disapproval, gripped the top of the fence so tightly her knuckles whitened. She was the unofficial neighborhood watch, HOA enforcer, and self-appointed arbiter of property values in Sycamore Heights. Everyone called her Karen behind her back, though never to her face. "You can't just remove a pool without proper permits," she said, her voice rising. "This affects all of our property values. The neighborhood covenant clearly states." "I have all the necessary permits," Mike interrupted, having anticipated this conversation for weeks. He'd lived in Sycamore Heights for 15 years, and in that time he watched as Diane had driven 3 different families to move away with her constant complaints and threats of legal action. "Well, I'd like to see them," she said, her chin jutting forward. "And the HOA committee needs to approve any exterior changes." Mike took a deep breath. "Diane, this is my property. The pool was cracked and leaking. It would have cost more to repair than it was worth, and my kids are grown now. No one uses it." "That's not the point," she snapped. "This is about maintaining neighborhood standards." Behind her, Mike could see her husband Todd standing in their backyard looking uncomfortable. Todd gave Mike an apologetic wave before disappearing back inside their immaculate colonial home. "I'll email you copies of the permits," Mike said, trying to end the conversation. "And I've already spoken with Brad from the HOA. He's approved the plan for the native garden that's going in." "Brad doesn't have unilateral authority," Diane said, her voice cold. "The full committee needs to vote." Before Mike could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen to see a text from his daughter, Emma. "Dad, heads up. Mrs. Winters was asking me about the pool when I came to pick up the mail yesterday. She said something about property values and covenant violations. Everything okay?" Mike texted back a quick handling it before looking up at Diane again. "I'm turning an unused broken pool into an environmentally friendly garden that will use less water and provide habitat for local wildlife," he explained. "My contractor will be here Monday to start filling in the hole. If you have concerns, you can bring them up at the next HOA meeting." "Oh, I will," Diane said, her eyes narrowing. "And I'll be documenting everything." She pulled out her phone and began taking photos of Mike's backyard. As she walked away, Mike heard her mutter something about neighborhood decline and legal options. He returned to his kitchen, his peaceful Saturday morning ruined. Little did he know that this was just the beginning of a neighborhood battle that would soon spiral completely out of control. By Monday morning, Mike had almost convinced himself that the confrontation with Diane had been exaggerated in his mind. Surely a reasonable person wouldn't escalate a simple home improvement project into a neighborhood crisis. He was wrong. The construction crew arrived at 7 sharp, their heavy equipment rumbling down the quiet suburban street. Mike greeted them with fresh coffee and went over the plans one last time. Fill in the pool depression, install proper drainage, prepare the soil for native plants, and set up the small stone patio where he envisioned himself enjoying peaceful evenings. Mr. Donovan, called Carlos the foreman, were ready to start bringing in the filled dirt. Mike nodded and was about to respond when a sharp voice cut through the morning air. "Excuse me. This work cannot proceed." Diane Winters stood at the edge of Mike's driveway, clipboard in hand, wearing what Mike had come to think of as her battle outfit. Crisp khaki pants, a polo shirt with the Sycamore Heights HOA logo, and sensible shoes perfect for patrolling the neighborhood. Behind her stood 2 other members of the HOA committee, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Diane," Mike said, fighting to keep his voice even, "I've explained that all the permits are in order." "We've called an emergency meeting of the HOA committee," she announced, thrusting a paper toward him. "This is a cease and desist notice until the committee can properly review your plans." Carlos glanced at Mike, clearly uncertain whether to continue. The other workers paused, looking between the 2 neighbors with the wary expressions of people who had seen similar conflicts before. "This isn't a legal document," Mike said after scanning the paper. "It's just a letter with your signature on a HOA letterhead." "It's a formal notice," Diane insisted. Her companions, Jane Parker and Richard Hoffman, nodded in agreement, though Richard couldn't quite meet Mike's eyes. "Look," Mike said, lowering his voice and stepping closer to the trio. "I've lived here for 15 years. I've never violated a covenant. I'm improving my property, not damaging it. The plans have been approved by the city." "The city doesn't understand our specific aesthetic concerns," Diane replied. "A native garden with wildflowers and grasses. This isn't some rural farmhouse, Mike. This is Sycamore Heights." Jane Parker, a retired teacher who had always been friendly to Mike, looked apologetic. "We're just concerned about precedent, Mike. If one person makes dramatic changes." "A garden is hardly dramatic," Mike countered. "And my landscaper specializes in upscale native installations. It's going to look beautiful." "That's subjective," Diane snapped. "And what about safety? An unfilled pool is a hazard." "Which is exactly why I'm filling it," Mike pointed out, his patience wearing thin. Richard cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could see the detailed landscaping plans. Maybe there's room for compromise." Before Mike could answer, the sound of another vehicle pulling up caught everyone's attention. It was Todd Winters, Diane's husband, arriving home unexpectedly in the middle of a workday. "Diane?" Todd called, looking confused as he approached the group. "What's going on?" "I got 3 messages from Mrs. Abernathy saying there was some kind of disturbance." Mike noticed how Todd's gaze flicked nervously between his wife and the construction crew. Something about his demeanor suggested this wasn't the first time he'd been called home to manage one of Diane's confrontations. "There's no disturbance," Mike said firmly. "Just a discussion about my landscaping project." "It's a violation," Diane insisted, turning to her husband. "And they're refusing to stop work." Todd sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Diane, we talked about this. If Mike has permits, the HOA has final say on aesthetic matters," she interrupted. While the Winters argued in hushed tones, Carlos approached Mike. "Sir, we're losing daylight. Do we continue or reschedule?" Mike looked at his watch, then at the increasingly agitated Diane, and at his backyard with the gaping hole where his pool had been. Rescheduling would cost him both time and money, and he had done everything by the book. "Start bringing in the filled dirt," he decided. "We have all the proper permits." As the first truck began backing up toward the yard, Diane pulled out. 15 minutes after Diane's call, a police cruiser pulled up in front of Mike's house. Officer James Patterson, a young cop with a freshly pressed uniform and the earnest expression of someone relatively new to the force, stepped out and surveyed the scene. By now, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, drawn by the unusual activity on their normally quiet street. "Good morning," Officer Patterson said, approaching the group in Mike's driveway. "We received a call about a disturbance." Diane stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Officer, thank you for responding so quickly. This man," she gestured dramatically toward Mike, "is violating our neighborhood covenants and creating a public safety hazard." Mike fought the urge to roll his eyes. "Officer, I'm Mike Donovan. This is my property. I'm simply having my old swimming pool removed and the area converted to a garden. I have all necessary permits." Officer Patterson looked between them, then at the construction equipment and workers who had paused their activities. "Ma'am, sir, this sounds like a civil matter between homeowners and your HOA." "But the safety hazard," Dan began. "What safety hazard specifically?" the officer asked. "An unfilled pool is dangerous for children," she insisted, "and the heavy equipment is disrupting the peace. Plus, there are specific covenants about maintaining the character of the neighborhood." Todd Winters stepped forward, looking mortified. "Officer, I apologize for the confusion. My wife is concerned about the HOA regulations, but this is about more than regulations," Diane cut in. "It's about respect for our community standards." A new voice joined the conversation. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Diane, let the man fix his yard." Everyone turned to see Eleanor Jenkins, an 80-year-old widow who had lived in Sycamore Heights since the development was built. She walked slowly toward the group, leaning on her cane, her white hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. "Mrs. Jenkins," Diane said, her voice softening artificially, "this affects your property value too." Eleanor snorted. "I'm 80 years old, dear. I don't give a rat's behind about property values anymore. What I do care about is watching birds in my garden, which Mike's native plants will attract more of." Officer Patterson seemed relieved by the elder woman's intervention. "Sir," he addressed Mike, "do you have your permits on hand?" Mike nodded and went into the house, returning moments later with a folder containing all of his documentation. The officer reviewed them carefully while Diane stood with arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. "Everything appears to be in order," Officer Patterson finally said. "The city has approved this work, including the safety provisions for the construction site." He turned to Diane. "Ma'am, this is indeed a civil matter between neighbors and your homeowners association. The police can't intervene in HOA disputes." "But what about the noise ordinance?" Diane tried one last angle. "These machines are disruptive." Construction is permitted between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. on weekdays according to city ordinances, the officer replied, clearly growing weary of the situation. Mr. Donovan isn't breaking any laws. Mike could see Diane's face flushing with anger and embarrassment as several neighbors exchanged knowing glances. This wasn't the first time she had escalated a minor issue into a spectacle. "Thank you, officer," Mike said. "I apologize that you were called out here unnecessarily." As Officer Patterson prepared to leave, a sleek black SUV pulled up. Lisa Chen, the president of the HOA board, stepped out. Unlike Diane, Lisa was known for her pragmatic approach to neighborhood issues. She'd been on vacation in Hawaii for the past week, which explained why Diane had been able to rally the emergency committee meeting without opposition. "I cut my trip short when I got 17 text messages about some kind of neighborhood crisis," Lisa said, approaching the group. "What's going on?" Quickly, Mike explained the situation while Diane attempted to interject with her concerns. Lisa listened patiently, then examined Mike's permits and landscape designs. "The native garden actually aligns perfectly with our new sustainability initiative," Lisa said after reviewing the plans. "The board voted last month to encourage water conservation and wildlife-friendly landscaping." "But we didn't finalize that," Diane protested. "We did. You were on vacation, remember?" Lisa replied smoothly. She turned to Mike. "These plans look lovely. The committee would appreciate progress photos for our newsletter, if you don't mind." Diane's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. The crowd of members began to disperse, some offering thumbs up to Mike as they left. "Well, if there's nothing further requiring police presence," Officer Patterson said. "There isn't," Lisa confirmed. "Thank you for your time, officer." As the police cruiser pulled away, Carlos approached Mike. "We good to continue, boss?" Mike nodded, relief washing over him. "Yes, let's get back to work." Diane remained standing at the edge of the driveway, looking stunned by the turn of events. Todd gently took her elbow. "Come on, honey. Let's go home." "This isn't over," Diane hissed as her husband led her away. "Not by a long shot." Eleanor Jenkins, who had stayed to watch the drama unfold, chuckled softly. "That woman needs a hobby that doesn't involve policing other people's lives." Mike smiled at the elderly neighbor. "Would you like to see the garden plans, Mrs. Jenkins? I'm including a bench where neighbors can sit and enjoy the butterflies and birds." As they walked toward the backyard, Mike could feel Diane watching from her window across the street. The battle might have been won, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the war was just beginning. For the next 3 days, the construction proceeded without incident. The pool cavity was filled, proper drainage installed, and the soil prepared for planting. Mike began to hope that perhaps Diane had finally accepted defeat and moved on to policing some other perceived neighborhood infraction. That hope evaporated on Thursday afternoon when he returned home from work to find his certified letter in his mailbox. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, tearing open the envelope to reveal a formal notice from a law firm representing the Sycamore Heights Homeowners Association. The letter cited obscure provisions from the neighborhood covenant and demanded he cease further work until a formal hearing could be held. The firm, Winters, Garfield, and Tate, was one Mike wasn't familiar with. He was still staring at the letter when his phone rang. It was Emma, his daughter. "Dad, what did you do to Mrs. Winters?" "I just got the weirdest call from her husband." Mike sighed. "What did Todd want?" "Not Todd. Their son, Brandon. Apparently he's an attorney now and wanted to give me a heads up that you're being sued by the HOA." Emma's voice held a mix of concern and amusement. He said, and I quote, "It's nothing personal, just a matter of principle." Mike pinched the bridge of his nose. "Brandon Winters is involved now? I thought he was working at some big firm in Chicago." "Apparently he's back home. Started his own practice with a couple of other lawyers." "Dad, is this serious?" Mike looked at the letter again, noting that Brandon Winters was indeed listed as the primary attorney. "It's ridiculous, is what it is. But yes, it seems they're actually trying to sue me over removing my pool." After reassuring his daughter that everything would be fine, Mike called Lisa Chen. The HOA president answered on the second ring. "Mike, I was just about to call you," she said, sounding exasperated. "Did you receive a letter from Winters, Garfield, and Tate?" "Just now." "What's going on, Lisa? I thought this was resolved." "It should have been." Diane went behind the board's back and enlisted her son to file this lawsuit. She's claiming to represent the HOA, but the board never authorized legal action. Can she do that? Technically, no, but Brandon found some loophole in our bylaws about individual members bringing actions on behalf of the community welfare. It's a stretch, but it's causing a mess. The board is meeting tonight to address it. Mike ran a hand through his hair. "So what happens now?" "Come to the meeting. 7 o'clock at the community center. Bring your permits, plans, everything. And Mike," Lisa paused, "you might want to bring some support." Diane's rallied a few neighbors to her side. When Mike arrived at the community center that evening, he was surprised by the number of cars in the parking lot. HOA meetings typically attracted only the most dedicated or bored residents, but tonight it appeared that half the neighborhood had turned out. Inside, the room was divided literally and figuratively. Chairs had been arranged on opposite sides of the aisle, with Diane and her supporters on the left, while the right side remained mostly empty. At the front of the room, the 7 members of the HOA board sat at a long table, looking uncomfortable. Brandon Winters stood near his mother, tablet in hand, conferring with a young woman who Mike assumed was another attorney from his firm. "Mike, over here." He turned to see Eleanor Jenkins waving from the second row on the right side of the room. Beside her sat Carlos, his landscaper, and to Mike's surprise, Todd Winters, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Todd," Mike whispered as he took a seat. "Are you sure you want to be on this side?" Todd sighed. "Diane and I don't always see eye to eye on, well, many things. I think what she's doing is wrong." Before Mike could respond, Lisa called the meeting to order. "We're here tonight to address a legal action initiated by Mrs. Winters regarding Mr. Donovan's property renovations," Lisa began. "Before we proceed, I want to clarify that this action was not authorized by the board." Diane stood up immediately. "Point of order. As a resident, I have every right to protect our community standards." "You have the right to voice concerns through proper channels," Lisa countered, "not to initiate legal proceedings in the HOA's name." Brandon Winters stepped forward. "If I may, Ms. Chen, my client is exercising her rights under Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the Covenant, which allows members to take action when the board fails to address serious violations." "There is no violation," Mike interjected. "I have all required permits and approvals." Brandon offered a condescending smile. "City permits don't supersede our covenant, Mr. Donovan. The aesthetic standards of Sycamore Heights explicitly mention the value of recreational facilities, including pools, to our community character." For the next 20 minutes, the meeting devolved into a heated debate about covenant interpretations, property rights, and the definition of community character. Diane repeatedly insisted that removing a pool fundamentally altered the neighborhood's appeal, while her supporters nodded vigorously. Finally, Eleanor Jenkins tapped her cane loudly on the floor, silencing the room. "I've lived here longer than anyone," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "And I remember when none of this was here, just fields and a creek where kids could play. We didn't need pools or tennis courts or any of that. Now Diane wants to tell us we can't even decide what to do with our own backyards." Several people applauded. Todd Winters, to Mike's surprise, was among them. Carlos stood next. "If I may," he said, opening his laptop, "I'd like to show the actual designs for Mr. Donovan's garden. This isn't some wild, unkempt space. It's a professionally designed native landscape that will enhance the beauty of the neighborhood." The next morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for the landscaping team to begin planting. Mike made a quick trip to the garden center to pick up some additional native flowering plants that Eleanor had suggested would attract hummingbirds. As he returned home, arms laden with flats of purple coneflowers and black-eyed Susans, he noticed something strange. The construction fence around his backyard was open, and Carlos' team was standing in a group near their trucks, looking concerned. "What's going on?" Mike asked, setting down the plants. Carlos approached, his expression grim. "Someone came in overnight, Mr. Donovan. Well, you should see for yourself." Mike followed Carlos through the gate and stopped short. The carefully graded soil had been disturbed, with deep gouges crisscrossing the entire area. Several of the drainage pipes had been pulled up and tossed aside, and bags of mulch had been slashed open, their contents scattered across the yard. "Who would do this?" Mike asked, though he already suspected the answer. "We found this." Carlos handed him a crumpled piece of paper. It was a printout of the HOA covenant section regarding pools and recreational facilities, with certain passages highlighted in neon yellow. No signature, no note, just the highlighted covenant. "Do you want to call the police?" Carlos asked. "This is vandalism." Mike was about to answer when his phone rang. It was Lisa Chen. "Mike, I just heard about your yard." "I'm so sorry. Half the neighborhood is talking about it." "News travels fast," Mike said, surveying the damage. "Any idea who might have done it?" Lisa hesitated. "I don't want to accuse anyone without proof, but Diane was seen walking her dog very early this morning, which is unusual for her. And Mrs. Abernathy, who lives on the corner, said she saw a figure in dark clothing in your yard around 2 a.m., but assumed it was you or one of your workers. It definitely wasn't me or my team," Mike said. He sighed deeply. "I should call the police." "Already done," Lisa replied. "As HOA president, I reported it as vandalism on a member's property. Officer Patterson is on his way." Sure enough, within 15 minutes, the same young officer who had responded to Diane's call earlier in the week arrived at Mike's house. This time, his expression was much more serious as he documented the damage and took statements from Mike and Carlos. Security cameras would have been helpful, Officer Patterson noted, looking around the yard. I actually ordered some yesterday, Mike said. After the HOA meeting, I had a feeling things might escalate. Good thinking, the officer replied. In the meantime, do you have any idea who might have done this? Mike chose his words carefully. I had some disagreements with neighbors about my renovation plans, but I can't say for certain who'd go this far. As Officer Patterson continued his investigation, taking photos and measurements, a small crowd began to gather outside the fence. News of the vandalism had spread quickly through the neighborhood text chains and social media groups. Among the onlookers, Mike spotted Todd Winters looking distinctly uncomfortable. When the officer stepped away to take a call, Todd approached Mike. I heard what happened, he said quietly. This is unacceptable. Do you know something about it? Mike asked directly. Todd's gaze dropped to his shoes. Diane was very upset after the meeting last night. She stayed up late, drinking wine and going through old HOA documents. I went to bed around midnight, and when I woke up at 6, she was already dressed and said she'd taken Bentley for an early walk. He paused. Her gardening shoes were muddy in the garage. Mike studied Todd's face, seeing the conflict there. Are you telling me this officially? I can't. Todd began, then straightened his shoulders. Yes, I am. This has gone too far. He turned and walked directly to Officer Patterson, who had just finished his call. From the corner of his eye, Mike saw a flash of blonde hair at the edge of the crowd. Diane stood there, watching as her husband spoke to the police officer. When she realized Mike had spotted her, she didn't look away. Instead, she stared back, her expression a mixture of defiance and something else. Fear, perhaps. Officer Patterson approached Mike after speaking with Todd. Mr. Donovan, based on the information I've gathered, we have reasonable suspicion to question Mrs. Winters about this incident. Would you like to press charges if we find evidence of her involvement? Mike looked again at Diane, who had now been joined by Brandon. The young lawyer had his arm protectively around his mother's shoulders, but his expression was one of resignation rather than defiance. I want to hold whoever did this accountable, Mike said finally, but I also have to live in this neighborhood. As the officer nodded and moved toward Diane and Brandon, Eleanor Jenkins appeared at Mike's side, accompanied by several other neighbors. We heard what happened, Eleanor said. It's disgraceful. A middle-aged man stepped forward, Jim Bartlett from 3 doors down, whom Mike knew only in passing. The neighborhood association has started a collection to help with repairs, he said, handing Mike an envelope. Most of us think your garden plan is wonderful. Another neighbor, Sarah Lewis, added, we've also arranged a planning party this weekend. A bunch of us will come help get everything back on track. Mike was momentarily speechless at the show of support. Thank you all. That's incredibly kind. Across the yard, the confrontation between Officer Patterson and Diane was becoming heated. Her voice carried clearly. This is absurd. I'm being persecuted for standing up for our community standards. Brandon tried to intervene. Mother, please don't say anything more. Let me handle this. But Diane was beyond listening. Mike Donovan is destroying our neighborhood's character, and all of you are just letting him do it. That pool was part of what made this a desirable place to live. Officer Patterson's response was measured but firm. Ma'am, we're not discussing the pool right now. We're investigating criminal vandalism. It's not vandalism to protect your community, Diane insisted, her voice rising to a near shriek. A heavy silence fell over the gathering as the implication of her words sank in. Brandon closed his eyes in defeat, while Todd stared at his wife in disbelief. Mrs. Winters, Officer Patterson said, I need you to come down to the station to answer some questions. Are you arresting me? Diane demanded, looking around wildly as if seeking support from the crowd. She found none. Not at this time, the officer replied, but we do need to take a formal statement. As Officer Patterson led Diane toward his cruiser, with Brandon and Todd following close behind, the crowd of neighbors began to disperse. Carlos approached Mike with a revised work plan. We can salvage most of what we've done, he said. The drainage will.